More watercolor paper? More. Give me more, please. Hello minders out there, welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor. Wow, it's been a good couple years on watercolor paper. Last year and so far this year we got several new kids on the block, and today we're talking about another one, Hahnemühle, and we've got several cool little products that they make. We'll show you those, and we're going to do a demo in particular on one. They're 300-pound Leonardo, and I've got that in a block, so cold press, can't wait. Everybody give it up for my studio partner Reese. Exciting times, right? New papers all around. How do I know how to pronounce it? Because I asked them. Yeah, I don't care what it looks like. Hahnemühle rhymes with Uafula. Anyway, I'm going to do a demo on 300-pound Hahnemühle paper, and we're going to do a skyscape. Skyscape is just a landscape where main subject is the sky. The sky takes center stage basically, and you might have a little strip of land or a little strip of water or something, but you really go all out rendering the sky, and they're usually quick, easy, and fun to do, and it's a great way to test wet and wet techniques or practice wet and wet techniques on a heavy duty paper like 300-pound. So we're going to put Hahnemühle Leonardo through its paces and see what happens, and I'll show you a few of the other things that Hahnemühle's got going on. Now, just by way of introduction, Hahnemühle is a German-made paper. I believe they're the oldest German-made paper out there, and they've been making fine art papers for a while, so this is not a new company, but their focus has been in Europe. Although in the United States, I think they have a pretty good reputation for like printing papers and some other fine art papers like drawing and pastel. But watercolor has kind of not really been marketed much over here. You'd have to order it from overseas in order to get it. But that's all changing. With Hahnemühle USA, they're basically trying to make inroads into the major US distributors. And I'm going to put links down in the description to where you can get them now, and you can look for them in future places like Jerry's Artarama and Cheap Joe's, and they're talking to all of these places. So let's get to it, and I'll show you a few other things. Alright, so Hahnemühle sent me several little things, and full disclosure, they're not sponsoring this video at all. I get to keep these items, but that's pretty typical. They wanted me to try them out and see what I thought. I have these two neat little sketchbooks, and I've already actually fooled around in this one. Not bad as sketchbooks go, but like most watercolor sketchbooks, they're not 100% cotton, but a nice linen kind of a cover, really well made, well bound. They have a number of paper grades, I guess you would call them, with finishes that are not 100% cotton. This is Quattro in a block, and at some point, you know, I may try that. This was interesting. This was a postcard block, and you can see it's really just a pad with a sort of a real heavy cardstock watercolor postcard printing on the back, so that's kind of neat. In addition to that, they actually have these sort of postcards, a little box, just a smaller version with rounded corners. A card, not quite as heavy. Do a little painting, you know, address it, post it, send it on to somebody in a nice little tin. But you know me, my main interest is in the 100% cotton papers, best of the best. With Hahnemühle, that's represented primarily by these two, Cezanne and Leonardo. These are blocks. They're available in both a hot press and cold press. The Cezanne is 140-pound, the Leonardo is 300-pound, roughly. You can get them in full sheets. So I was real anxious to try it out. Hahnemühle has a really good reputation for me. I guess it just depends on who you ask, but for me, they've got a really good reputation in the fine art printing market. That would be like printing press, you know, or papers that would go through an inkjet printer or a giclée printer. I was familiar with their name from that. I guess in Europe, probably artists are used to being able to get this. I don't know, but I do know that their marketing efforts here in the U.S. are fairly new and recent since the beginning of this year, and that's exciting. It's always exciting to have new players, you know, so I always like to try new things, and we are going to do that today. So I'm anxious to do a skyscape, and as we go along I will give you some tips on painting skyscapes, but I'll also give you my thoughts on this paper. Alright, so today I'm using my ceramic palette, my big ceramic palette. I do have my fuller color palette available on hand if I need it, but this is more of a limited palette, but it has a bigger mixing area. It's great for skies, so that's why I'm using that. And I've got it pre-wet. I'm going to start by using this Sterling Edwards bristle brush to wet my sky. I used to wet with big mops, but ever since I got introduced to his brushes, and he tends to use these to wet his paper. I like doing that. I like the way it kind of forces the water right into the paper in a stiff way. It kind of gets absorbed quicker, I guess. But you can use a mop. By a mop, you know, I mean, well, it can be a big flat like this, or a large round, you know, hake or hock, whatever, however you pronounce them. Brushes like this work. You can use just a spray bottle. If you're going to wet the whole thing, you can use a spray bottle. Usually your first application of water primes the surface, and you'll see it start to absorb fairly quickly, especially with 300 pound, which is very thirsty paper. So it usually takes, you know, another coating. You don't always have to approach skies this way with a totally wet paper. You can do it in just wetting places. So lots of ways to do skies. And I would, you know, encourage you to experiment with skies. I did a 4-part sky study video. If you haven't seen it, well, I'll show you the link above to that. And yeah, this 300 pound paper is really drinking in the water. But you get a lot less buckling on 300 pound than you do on 140 pound. So I just don't want to deal with peaks and valleys and water settling in places. A lot of times with 140 pound, you know, you can work around it and it's okay. But I love 300 pound paper. So, alright, I'm going to start with an ultramarine blue and an ultramarine violet mix. It's mostly ultramarine blue. I'm just going to start at the top. Now generally when I'm doing a sky, I do them quickly and simply, because usually I got a lot going on, and I'm going to dab a little Payne's Gray in there. Usually I got a lot going on with the landscape, and you know, most landscapes you just don't want to detract. You want a sky that's complementary and brings attention to your main subject. I'm tilting this backwards. Just going to get it to run back. I'm mixing some quinacridone rose with some Payne's Gray. I'm going to deepen this top. I want this to be a very dramatic sky. Anyway, what I was saying is a lot of times I'll treat them simply, but when you do a skyscape, you can actually treat your sky as your main subject and plan for some drama, you know. Those clouds become your center focus and your main subject. I'm trying to get a deep violet going up here. Alright, maybe get some streaks now. And with a skyscape, I usually keep about the bottom fifth. I just plan on doing very simple subject. You don't have to, it's up to you. I just get some regular tissue, regular box tissue. If you try this technique, make sure you don't get tissue with hand lotion in it. And this is where I start pulling out my clouds. And I can do this gently, but where you press hard, you'll pull out more. Well, that's interesting. I didn't expect that. It kind of left a fingerprint. And everywhere I'm pressing tissue, the hardest, it gets whiter, and it stops the flow of what's going on up here in the sky. I'll let some of this rise up here to the edge and get kind of this little composition going. You know, when you render clouds, try not to render cotton balls, you know, symmetrical little balls. Make them nice and organic looking, and Get some wispiness. You have really quite a lot of control doing this. And I do like, for the most part, what this paper is doing with this. Now down here on the horizon, my horizon is going to be right about here. I'm going to just go ahead and put a second bank of clouds, because that'll give me some contrast down here for that distant horizon line to work against. Now, just like with arches or any other 300-pound, it stays, it's thirsty, drinks in a lot of water, and it stays wet for a while. I can increase some contrast in here, some of these areas, and I got to be careful because I think I already got that brush too wet, or I'm going to get back runs. But I can go through and selectively, I'm using mainly Payne's Gray now with a little bit of ultramarine blue, and I'm picking up a little bit of this. Up here is actually alizarin crimson. This over here is quinacridone rose. So you can see how I'm just working contrast in spots, and that can be like a fainter bank of clouds up over here in the distance. Another thing you can do is clean out your bristle brush, and before all of this sets into hard edges, just blend it out. Bristle brush makes a great blender. Just have fun with it. Just think like a cloud, be the cloud. Some clever Bob Ross statement would probably be appropriate now, but I can dot in some darker colors. You know how the clouds, you'll see if you look, the underside of clouds are a lot darker. So I'm dry brushing in some, and then I'm blotting out my brush. I'm going to go back and blend. Once you dry this brush out, you have a lot of blending ability, and I'm having to watch because I'm picking up as well as blending in, so it's going to look splotchy. Clouds though are kind of forgiving, so it's not a big deal. And I think at this point I'm going to let that dry. Alright, so I think that's pretty dry. This 300-pound dries a little faster than Arch's 300-pound. So that's interesting. Let me just see what kind of lifting properties I have. Oh, good. Pretty good. We'll do some more of that in a bit. What I'm going to do now is get a little Indian yellow and orange. I'm going to warm up some of these clouds as if we're getting some light maybe coming in this direction, and it's illuminating. And when you do something like this, you got to be careful, and that's why I'm testing. Got to be careful not to lower the value of your clouds much. You just want to kiss it with color and light, because if you lower the value, then you don't have the effect of light anymore. And I'm just going to blend that out. I just wanted to warm that up in some of the light places there, lightest parts of the cloud. Rinse my brush, squeeze it out, and just make sure it's blended in. And I'm going to add a few separations to some of these lines of clouds, so maybe to separate this cloud bank from that cloud bank a little bit. Once these clouds are dry, you can do some glazing like this. So I'm blending out that, and then I'm going to go back in here and pick up that edge to reestablish my cloud edge. Bring in a flat, smaller flat here. The biggest thing you need to worry about when doing these skyscapes is your wetness factor. When you start putting down these wet areas, just be careful as you go back in and play with them like I'm doing now, because it's prime back run territory. And if you're not careful, you can easily get a back run by going into a wet area or a damp area with too wet a brush. And you can see what I did. And I'm kind of trying to model the underneath of this cloud, but also at the same time bring a little separation between this cloud bank and that cloud bank. Fun, fun, fun. I'm going to do it over here too. I'm just picking up some color off my palette here, and those areas are still damp. I can just pop in some low lights. You know, and you can continue to model these shapes all day long if you want to. Just be careful not to overwork it. Well, I started to say I'm going to let it dry, but I think I'm going to go ahead and put in my horizon. I'm probably going to have to do this in a couple layers. Get some edges and some overlap. I've got a little, since I have a dip in the clouds here, I may do something a little higher here to kind of bring the eye line together. Or the eye direction, I should say. I think the key to a good skyscape is just keeping that foreground really simple. You can see what I'm doing here with this flat. I'm taking the corner and I'm just shoving it up a little bit. Getting these kind of automatic little distant cloud shape or tree line shapes. I'm gonna let that dry. I may go back and fiddle with it, but it shouldn't be a whole lot I need to do to that. Alright, so this is dry. I think what I'm gonna do now is, I don't want to brush this anymore, but I want to completely wet this bottom because I want to bring some dark underneath to the clouds and make it look like the clouds are, you know, curling under. So I'm just going to mist and wet that area. And in this wet area, I'm just going to basically kind of touch. Probably ought to be using a round brush for this. I'm getting some chisel kind of marks, but I'm hoping it'll spread out. A little bit of edge here where it's not as wet. Just going to keep it nice and misted. Yeah, and that's flowing pretty well now. Pretty happy with that. So it kind of looks like you got some underneath to the clouds, and a lot of times the clouds will flatten. So you can, you know, kind of go in here and flatten some of these shapes a bit. Don't paint these things from your head, you know. Go study some cloud photos. Go study some actual clouds, you know. You see a dramatic sky one evening, go study it. And I'm going to add a little bit of Prussian blue to that same mix. Because I feel like this land ends a little too abruptly. So I'm just going to add some distant hills here. Just giving that a little bit of depth. Yeah, we're really starting to look like something now. This is kind of cool because right in here and over here it looks like, you know how when you can see vistas a long way off and you can see where it's raining. So that's kind of what that looks like. I like that. Just in a couple places. And that's kind of neat there. I love these happy accidents where I tried to make the tree line there and this was still wet. It really looks like it's in rain and fog over in this area. You don't always get the happy accidents. Sometimes they look like terrible accidents. I like it. I don't think we really need a whole lot more than that. And as I usually do, I'll probably stare at it over the next day or so, and I might define just a couple little areas. But alright, I've let it sit for about an hour and I've spent some time looking at it. I did decide to go in and add some glazes, sort of a peachy golden color, just to give it a little more of a sun-tipped look up here. So I think now I'm pretty happy with it and I'm pretty much done. Now my thoughts on Hahnemühle. I really like the paper. I didn't find anything objectionable really. The paper did what I expected it to do, did what I needed it to do. Lifting qualities were pretty good, very similar to Arches. I do think that this dries a little quicker than Arches 300 pound. I did go back also and scrub some highlights. In a couple places I scrubbed very vigorously. The paper held up extremely well, as I would expect 300 pound to do. Colors are about what I would expect on 300 pound. Colors tend to dull a little more on 300 pound than they do on 140. That's to be expected. It's because of the thirstiness of the paper. And colors just don't sit up on top quite as well as they do on 140. But still, if you paint with that in mind, you can still get some great looking color. So all in all, I think the Hahnemühle Leonardo 300 pound is a wonderful paper. I'm anxious to try the Cezanne or the 140 pound, and I will be doing that in future demos. I'll also be trying the hot press versions of these at some point. Always great to have a big variety of paper. And really it takes time over many paintings to kind of get, you know, the feel of the pluses and minuses of a particular paper. But they've done a really good job. Thanks everyone. Hope you enjoyed this demo. Thanks for liking and subscribing everyone. I will have what links I could put for Hahnemühle down in the description as to where they can be purchased. But look in the future, places like Dick Blick, Jerry's Artarama, Cheap Joe's art stuff. Hopefully you'll see it cropping up in the places that you like to buy. I know that Cezanne is available on Amazon, and I'll put a link to that. And I hope if it's something that you would like to try, that you will. Thanks for watching everyone. Thanks for liking and subscribing. Thank you so much patrons for being my sponsors. I love having my viewers as my sponsors. Thanks. We'll see everyone in the next video.